Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Thanks for joining me here at Cold Case Christianity. I'm J. Warner Wallace. I wonder how many of us at this point in our history as a country recognize the fantastic opportunity that's in front of us as Christians, and especially those of us who are committed to Christian case making. What I mean is, are committed to understanding enough of what we believe as Christians to be able to make the case to those around us who maybe don't believe what we believe as Christians. Now it seems to me is the time, a great time. Maybe it now is better than any other time for us to make the case for what we believe. And it kind of dawned on me, of course, for those of us who do this on a daily basis, and I try to do this at coldcasechristianity.com, our website, and I've certainly written about this in the past, I think we kind of find this as our natural way of expressing what we believe and who we are as Christians. But for a lot of us in the church, this isn't the case at all. In fact, we've been attending church on Sundays, or maybe been a part of our cultural experience as Christians, without giving much thought as to whether or not it's true or why it's true. And we happen to be at a place, I think, in our history where these issues are now more critical than ever before. And I started to realize it as I was watching and sifting through the data. We talked about it here a few weeks ago. I even wrote an article at coldcasechristianity.com talking about the results of the recent Pew Research Center's poll called America's Changing Religious Landscape. Now, they do these polls every few years, and they kind of establish the benchmark of those folks who report what they believe, either as Christians or otherwise, and they kind of list these the data so that everybody else gets a chance to kind of look at it. And of course, it almost always makes headlines, because what we see, the trend over the last 20 years or more, is that the number of people who report themselves, or kind of would affiliate themselves, would claim at least that they are part of some Christian affiliation, some Christian denomination, some Christian belief system, that number continues to drop. And it's been dropping this way for for several decades. And as a matter of fact, right now, the most recent poll done this year, 2015, and surveying the change since the last major poll of this nature, which was done in 2017, is looking at what the difference is between these two 8-year gap or so, 7 or 8 years. And noticing, and they reported this about a month and a half ago, that the number of Christians who would report, the number of people in the country rather, who would report that they are affiliated with some form of Christianity has dropped from 78.4% to 70.6%. So it's nearly an 8% drop, about a point a year is dropping. And of course, when we first hear those numbers, it gives us great pause, right? We think to ourselves, what? Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Project this going forward 20 years. Are we going to be 20 points lower? And I think what we're going to see is, there's no doubt about this. There's no doubt that the trend going from the past to the present, and probably going into the future, it's not necessarily a peak and valley trend as we reported a couple of weeks ago. It is a downward trend in terms of numbers. I get that. But what I thought was interesting as I was kind of parsing through all the data to see, because it's not just those who report a religious affiliation with Christianity, it's Jewish believers, Muslim believers, Buddhist believers, all these different believers are reporting as part of this survey, and we get the raw numbers. Even atheists and agnostics are on this poll. So we can see where the demographic shift is taking place. And if you look at the press, of course, the secular, more liberally minded, secularly minded press has reported this as, almost triumphantly, as the steady, inevitable decline of Christianity. And in some sense, what they're saying, it numerically could be substantiated. I get that. But what I'm seeing in the numbers is something a little bit different. Here's what I find is very interesting. What I find is interesting is that the percentage of those of us who would say we're no longer Christians or no longer want to be affiliated with some form of Christianity, that percentage is growing. People are jumping out. But interestingly, while those who claim to be Christians is down almost 8% in the last 7 years, you might think, and kind of the first reaction is to think, well, gosh, that means that we're becoming more atheistic as a culture, right? I mean, isn't that what we hear about Europe? Isn't that what we hear about Canada? That this is a trend moving away. We're in a post-Christian society that's becoming more and more atheistic. Well, the numbers don't actually bear that out. As a matter of fact, during that same 7-year period when Christianity dropped by 7.8%, atheism only rose by 1.5%. So it's not as though all of those who jump out of their affiliation or no longer claim to be Christians are now claiming to be atheists. That isn't the case at all. As a matter of fact, what's happening instead is that these folks are kind of set a category of their own, because one of the categories in the survey was you have what is your religious affiliation? You could check none if you didn't want to check some form of Christianity or Jewish belief system or a Hindu belief system or a Buddhist or a Mormon or a Muslim. All of these were options, but one option was none. And the number that seems to be growing, where are all those Christians, where are they going? Those ex-Christians, well, they're going to a category affectionately known as the nones. That group is growing. It's up to about 22% right now. Interesting, isn't it? What I find interesting about it is that these are not people who say that they are now atheists. And that's the way I think when the survey is kind of first pitched to the culture and you hear it reported on the news, there's this sense that, wow, we're less and less Christian, we're less and less theistic, we're more and more atheistic or secular. No, not actually true at all. As a matter of fact, the percentage of drop in Christian reporting is not equaled by a percentage of growth in atheist reporting. In fact, these people are not, at least not yet, atheists. They seem to have some form of theism that they're at least open to, because they will not identify themselves as atheists. They are theists of some stripe. Some of them are deists. Some of them are very fuzzy, kind of inclusive, universalistic versions of theism. I'll grant that. But they are not all the way over into the ledger of atheists or agnostics, because those were choices that were available to them, and they simply did not select those boxes. Now, isn't that interesting? That tells us something, it seems to me. It tells us that if you add up all those people who are claiming affiliation with Judaism or Islam or Buddhism or Christianity, and all those people who are not identifying themselves as atheists, they're not quite sure where they fit, they don't claim to be Christians anymore, but that they don't know where they really fit, that means you've got 92.9% of our culture is some form of theism or deism. And only the remaining percentage are folks who are either agnostic or atheistic. Wow, think about that for a minute. It's one thing to think, well, how am I going to convince the skeptical world of atheists that Christianity is true? But there are a lot of folks out there right now who are not Christians, who already accept the reality of the supernatural. They already open to the possibility that, in fact, the reasonable inference of miracles, of supernatural, extranatural, supranatural interaction in the universe. They have already got that. That part they don't resist. That part they don't deny. What they don't, I think, buy is something about the Christian worldview. They're halfway to us, but they're not all the way to us. Why? Well, I think if my anecdotal experience as a speaker around the country has any bearing on this at all, and of course, anecdotal experiences don't often give you precise data. But my anecdotal experience is that when I go from church to church, we've got an entire church family, but in the large part, who just are not ready to defend what they believe. As a matter of fact, most of the folks who are in the church are there because they were raised in the church, they had an experience they thought confirmed Christianity for them, or they were transformed by Jesus. Now, those are all good things, but they didn't come into the system because they examined a set of evidences and determined that this is true. Therefore, when a push comes to shove, they're unable to defend what they believe. It seems to me if we've got a culture in which so many people are open to theism, we've got an unbelievable opportunity to take them one more step by making the reasonable case for the evidential, historically reliable New Testament report of the resurrection. But you might think, oh, it's such a challenge to convince it. Really? These folks are already open to the miraculous. They're already open to some form of theism or deism. We simply need to go the extra mile to be able to make the case. So my question to you is this, if you're watching this show. Have you really tapped into the free available resources that many Christian apologists, case makers I call them, such as myself and others who are right here on the NRB network, have made available to you. All of us are friends doing the same kind of ministry, as you know probably from watching Frank Turek's show, other shows that are here on the NRB network. We're all connected to each other in this same glorious ministry. And what we want to do is to be able to equip the church to do what I think is an opportunistic form of evangelism right now, where we've got a culture that has stepped away from Christianity, I think largely because of their experience in the church rather than whether or not they believe or whether they've even examined the case for Jesus. I'll bet you that most people, if you ask them why are they no longer a Christian, it's going to come back to some experience they've had in the church, some experience they've had of Christians, rather than the case for Christianity, because I'll bet you no one's ever presented them the evidential case for Christianity. Folks, I'm telling you, if a church is of, say, 2,000 member church, and you host an apologetics event, you'll be lucky to get 10% of the church to show up, 200. Because we are not yet a culture that embraces this form of intellectualism as a form of worship, even though the Bible commands us to do so. It's time for us to be able to step up and make the case for what we believe, because right now we have the rare opportunity, I do believe, we're in a situation at a point of history in America where the case for Christianity is more important than ever, because we're not dealing with folks who are jumping ship to atheism. We're simply dealing with people who are not quite sure what to do with Christianity, but they are still theists, they're still deists, there's some still form of God worshipers. This is the absolute best time to reach them and push them across the goal line if we have enough information and the ability to communicate what we believe as Christians. Now we'll come back and I'll offer a couple of thoughts on why that can be difficult and what we can do about it right after this break.
In addition to Jim's daily blog and weekly podcasts and videos, Jim continues to write books designed to help you become a better Christian casemaker. At coldcasechristianity.com, you'll find a link to Cold Case Christianity, a homicide detective investigates the claims of the Gospels, and Alive, a cold case approach to the resurrection. These resources will help you defend what you believe and share it with others.
Now, as you know, if you've watched our show here, I typically will dip into my experience as either a police officer or as a cold case homicide detective to kind of analogize some of the issues to make them easier for us to kind of grab onto and assess and incorporate into our own lives. And so I want to do that again right now. I want to talk about what makes the difference between a first responder and a free rider. Because if I'm honest with you, what I'm seeing sometimes in the church at large, and I mean, we're all guilty of wanting to relax, wanting to take it easy, wanting the easy road out. I'm as guilty as that as anybody else. And so we sometimes are in for a free ride as Christians. We're more concerned with just our experience on Sundays and what can the church do for me than we are first responders. And there's a difference. And police officers, we get it because we are first responders. Our goal is to get to the scene before anybody else does and do what we can to make a bad situation better. Right? We're first responders. This is also true of paramedics, of fire department personnel, any kind of rescue personnel. First responders get ahead. Now, if you've seen, in our city, we are lucky. I mean, I felt like I worked for a great agency in Los Angeles County, and we actually just deploy 2-man units on our patrol watch at night. As soon as it gets dark, our 1-man cars go to 2-man cars, and we have enough staff and enough financing to be able to do that. I felt very lucky. But if you were to watch those units go by on the street back and forth, and you saw they had 2 officers, you might kind of wonder, what's that guy on the? I mean, do I really need? I mean, all day long I've been watching one guy drive cars around here. Now all of a sudden I got 2. What does the passenger do? But I want to tell you right now, in police cars, although there's somebody in the passenger seat, there is nobody along for a free ride. That passenger is not really a passenger in the traditional sense, where he's being driven around by a guy who's doing all the work, or a gal who's doing all the work.